Hello guys, I welcome you back to our class on Program Development Part 2. I still remain your teacher, Justice Bartholomew Bamalo Bassi. In the Part 2 of our class, we'll be looking into the meaning of compiler and interpreter, key differences between compiler and interpreter, examples of compiled and interpreted programming languages, and finally, examples of compiled and interpreted programs. But before we go into all that, I want us to understand that we generally write a computer program using a high-level language, also called source code. A high-level language is a language that is understandable by us humans. A computer cannot understand high-level language. It only understands the program written in zeros and ones, that is in binary form, called the machine code. To convert source code into machine code, we use either a compiler or an interpreter. Both compilers and interpreters are used to convert a program written in a high-level language into a machine code understood by computers. Now, what is a compiler? A compiler is a computer program that translates programs, that's in computer instructions, written in high-level language into machine code. That is the form in which the programs can be understood and run by the computer. The compiler translates each high-level instruction into several machine code instructions in a process called compilation and produces a complete independent program that can be run by the computer as often as required without the original source program being present. What is an interpreter? An interpreter is a computer program that translates and executes a program written in high-level language. An interpreter translates the source program and executes it instruction by instruction each time that program is run. For example, if you can look at the picture on the screen, we have a compiler and an interpreter. The picture depicts how the both of them work. On the compiler, you can see a source code written in C language. The compiler will first of all compile it and translate it into a machine code that the computer can understand, and then the program will be executed by the computer. But on the interpreter, it doesn't involve translating the actual code, the source code, into machine code. It goes straight to interpret and execute the program. There are key differences between compiler and interpreter. One of the differences is that the compiler takes a program as a whole and translates it, but interpreter translates a program statement by statement. Number 2, intermediate code or target code is generated in case of a compiler. An interpreter doesn't create intermediate code. A compiler is comparatively faster than interpreter, as the compiler takes the whole program at one go, whereas interpreters compile each line of code after the other. The compiler requires more memory than interpreter because of the generation of object code. Compiler presents all errors concurrently, and it's difficult to detect the errors. In contrast, interpreter displays errors of each statement one by one, and it is easier to detect errors. In compiler, when an error occurs in the program, it stops its translation, and after removing error, while program is translated again. On the contrary, when an error takes place in the interpreter, it prevents its translation, and after removing the error, translation continues. In a compiler, the process requires two steps, in which firstly, source code is translated to target program, then executed. While in interpreter, it is one-step process, in which source code is compiled and executed at the same time. And we are going to see examples of compiled programming languages and interpreted programming languages. Examples of compiled programming languages include C, C#, C++, Ada, Argo, COBOL, Clio, Erlang, and Java. While examples of interpreted programming languages include PHP, Python, BASIC, Excel formulas, Perl, Visual Basic Script, PowerShell, Scheme, Bash, Fortran, PostScript, TCL, and Java. Now, if you can notice, Java appeared as both a compiled and interpreted programming language. It is because Java fell under a group of programming languages that is referred to as bytecode. Bytecode languages are a type of programming language that fall under the categories of both compiled and interpreted languages because they employ both compilation and interpretation to execute code. It is this attribute of Java that allows it to be run on multiple platforms. We're going to look at examples of compiled and interpreted programs. Now, on the left side of the screen, we'll start with a compiled program. It involves two steps, and we are using Java programming language. Now, when you type java hello.java, this compiles the hello.java file into Java bytecode. That is Java's method of compiling source code. After taking this initial step, you then run the program. Provided the compiler generated a file with all the compiled code, in this case a class file, what you are going to get as an output is Java hello. Now, we're going to look at example of interpreted program. Interpreted programs involves only one step, and we're using a Python programming language for this example. We can type Python hello_word.py. When you run the above in a command line, you are running the Python interpreter and passing it the name of the Python file you want to run. When you type Python print_text.py hello world, you are telling the Python interpreter to run print_text.py and pass it the parameters hello and word. These are examples of how compilers and interpreters work. At this point, I believe that we have gotten all the gist, and we can summarize what we have learned as follows. A compiler is a computer program that translates programs, instructions written in high-level language into machine code, the form in which the program can be understood and run by the computer. We also discussed that an interpreter is a computer program that translates and executes a program written in high-level languages. We also noted key differences between compiler and interpreter. And we also saw that compiled programming languages include C, C#, C++, and so on and so forth. We also discussed that interpreted programming languages include PHP, Python, BASIC, Excel formula, Perl, and so on and so forth. And finally, we saw examples of compiled and interpreted programs. Now, at this point, we're going to do some exercise. In this exercise, you are expected to answer all the questions. The first question is, other than the examples given in the class, state 5 other examples of compiled and interpreted programming languages, respectively. Second question is, using another programming language you know, other than Java and Python, demonstrate clearly how a compiler and an interpreter work. Thirdly, is there any significant difference between object code, machine code, and intermediate code in relation to compiler? And the last question, What is the difference between source code and object code? I am grateful for your attention in this class. I'm going to see you in our next class. Thank you. Bye.